दोस्तों, आप सबका अनहद की ओर से बहुत बहुत स्वागत है आज के प्रोग्राम में। और आज से हम ये एक सीरीज शुरू कर रहे हैं नई लेक्चर्स की, जो ऑनलाइन लेक्चर्स होंगे। इसका टाइटल है साझी विरासत। मैं बस इतना ही कहूंगी कि हमें ऐसा लगा कि ऐसे वक्त में जब चारों तरफ इतनी नफरत फैली हुई है, तो उसमें कुछ प्यार मोहब्बत की भी बात की जाए और कुछ ये भी बात की जाए कि हम लोग सदियों से कैसे एक दूसरे के साथ मिलजुल के रहते रहे हैं। और कोशिश की जाए कि ये छोटा सा संदेश हम और लोगों तक पहुंचा सकें, ताकि कुछ नफरत को कहीं ना कहीं कम करने में हमारा थोड़ा सा ये योगदान हो। आज हमारे साथ बहुत ही एमिनेंट स्पीकर्स हैं, डॉक्टर गणेश देवी एंड मदन गोपाल सिंह, जिनको मृदुला मुखर्जी इंट्रोड्यूस करेंगी बुलाने से पहले। मृदुला मुखर्जी आज का प्रोग्राम चेयर कर रही हैं, जो एक जानी मानी साहित्यकार हैं, हिस्टोरियन हैं। और वो सेंटर फॉर हिस्टोरिकल स्टडीज जेएनयू की फॉर्मर चेयरपर्सन रह चुकी हैं, और नेहरू मेमोरियल म्यूजियम और लाइब्रेरी की डायरेक्टर रह चुकी हैं। और उस सबसे ज्यादा ये कि हमारी बहुत अच्छी दोस्त है, और जब भी हम कहते हैं हमेशा फौरन तैयार हो जाती हैं बोलने को भी और चेयर करने को भी। तो थैंक यू मृदुला, एंड थैंक यू मदन जी एंड डॉक्टर गणेश देवी। तो ओवर टू यू मृदुला। मैं सिर्फ जी।
Thank you, Shabnam. It is always a pleasure to be able to contribute in any small way to your efforts at continuous efforts, if I may say, untiring efforts at trying to make this world a better place to live in and this country a better place to live in. And I'm very honored that you have invited me to chair a panel, which is an exceptionally interesting and distinguished panel. I cannot think of two better names for this subject of telling us about our common cultural inheritance, हमारी सांझी विरासत के बारे में। इन दोनों से ज़्यादा अच्छे नाम तो मुझे ध्यान में भी नहीं आ सकते। तो मैं बहुत ही खुश हूँ कि आज हम इस प्रोग्राम में दो बहुत ही एमिनेंट स्कॉलर्स और मल्टीडिसिप्लिनरी एक्सपर्ट्स जो हैं, उन दोनों को हम आज सुनेंगे, देखेंगे और उनके बारे में जानेंगे। वो खुद से दोनों का अपना जो जिंदगी है वो इस आज का जो टॉपिक है उसकी जीती जागती एग्जाम्पल्स हैं। जैसे वो बताएंगे अपने काम के बारे में भी और हमारे ट्रेडिशंस के बारे में भी, तो आप खुद ही समझ जाएंगे कि ये कैसे ये अपने जिंदगी में इन्होंने इस आइडिया को किस तरह से उतारा है। तो मैं शुरू करती हूँ। सबसे पहले मैं इनवाइट करूंगी प्रोफेसर गणेश देवी को। उनके बारे में मैं थोड़ा सा आपको इंट्रोडक्शन दे दूं। वैसे तो उनका इंट्रोडक्शन बहुत लंबा है, पर मैं उसमें से कुछ थोड़ी सी बातें आपको आपके साथ शेयर करती हूँ। Professor Ganesh Devy was a professor of English at Baroda University from 1980 to 1996. But then he gave up his formal academic career, if I may say so, in order to initiate work among the notified tribes and the Adivasis. And during this work, he created the Bhasha Research and Academy, an Adivasi Academy at Pune and also at Tejgarh. And then he has been engaged in collecting, in surveying the languages of India with the help of some 3,000 volunteers. This is perhaps the biggest project not ever undertaken, not only in India, but in the world. And he has edited close to 90 books in areas which include literary studies, philosophy, and linguistics. He has also been leading a movement which he has termed Dakshinayan, which is a movement against what he has been seeing and experiencing and fighting against, which is the growing intolerance that we have been subjected to, as well as what was typified in the murders of several intellectuals in India in the last few years. And for that, he actually moved to Dharwad and settled down there in order to lead this movement and in order to continue with the work that he had been doing all these years. Dr. Devi, especially through the work which he has done in documenting the enormous diversity, that linguistic diversity that we have in India, not just the well-known languages, but the dialects of the tribes, of the different kinds of communities, of small groups, where the speakers of a language may not be in more than hundreds or thousands. Through that, he has shown to us what kind of diversity we are actually, fortunate to have in our country. It's not just a question of documenting it, but also to give us a sense of pride. How many countries are in the world who can actually claim to have this kind of a rich history? Dr. Devi.
Professor Mridula ji, I'm grateful for your kind words of introduction. For me, it is an honor to be speaking in a panel that is chaired by you. Thank you. और शबनम जी, मैं आपको आदाब, मेरा स्नेह, प्यार, आपका जो करेज है और कंटिन्यूअस काम है, उसके लिए मैं आपको सलाम करता हूँ। मुझे बड़ी खुशी हो रही कि मदन गोपाल जी के साथ मैं रह के इस पैनल में बात करूंगा। इस सीरीज का पहला ही पैनल है और साझी विरासत, हमारा शेयर्ड इनहेरिटेंस क्या है, उसके बारे में बात करना है। तो कुछ मेरे डिसिप्लिन के अंदर और कुछ मेरे डिसिप्लिन के बाहर की चीजें मैं आपके सामने रखना चाहूंगा। सबसे पहले दो बहुत जानने जैसी बातें मैं आपसे शेयर करना चाहता हूं। पहली तो यह है कि पूरी दुनिया में इस समय अलग अलग एस्टिमेट्स के मुताबिक शायद 7,000 भाषाएं, फिर उन्हें स्क्रिप्ट हो ना हो उसे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता, क्योंकि एक भाषा होने के लिए लिपि होना उस भाषा को जरूरी ही है, ऐसे मानना गलत है। जैसे अंग्रेजी को अपनी लिपि आज भी नहीं है, वो रोमन लिपि इस्तेमाल करते हैं। अंग्रेजी भली भांति भाषा तो है सही। तो लिपि हो या ना हो, लेकिन भाषाएं है ऐसी लगभग 7,000 भाषाएं पूरी दुनिया में बोली जाती है। ये एस्टिमेट्स यूनेस्को ने भी दिए हैं, एथनोलॉग ने दिए हैं, अलग अलग देशों के सेंसस अथॉरिटीज के रिपोर्ट्स इकट्ठा करके भी ये रिपोर्ट्स, ये शायद एस्टिमेट स्वीकारा जा सकता है। अगर कोई पूछे कि इसमें से कौन सा ऐसा देश है जहां दुनिया में सबसे ज्यादा भाषाएं बोली जाती है, तो इसके दो जवाब है। एक जवाब है पापुआ न्यू गिनी, जहां 50 साल पहले 1100 भाषा होने का क्लेम था। इंडोनेशिया में शायद 800 भाषाएं होने का क्लेम था। ये एक जवाब है। दूसरा जवाब ये है कि आज के स्थिति में पापुआ न्यू गिनी में भाषाओं की गिनती सही ढंग से नहीं होने से और वहां की तादाद, लोक संख्या काफी प्रमाण में विस्थापित होने के सिलसिला शुरू रहने से वहां भाषाओं की संख्या 1100 नहीं लेकिन 400 तक भी गिनना मुश्किल हो गया है। इंडोनेशिया की हालत इससे थोड़ी बदतर है। हमारे यहाँ 1961 में 1652 मातृभाषाओं की बात थी सेंसस में। इन 1652 में से आज 2011 के सेंसस में 1380 मातृभाषाओं के नाम दोबारा आए हैं। यानी बहुत दुख की बात है कि 250 भाषाएं मर जाना 50 साल में। लेकिन ये नहीं कि हमारा देश भाषाओं की स्मशान भूमि ही बन गया हो। बहुत बड़ी संख्या में भाषाएं बोली जाती है। जब मेरे साथियों के साथ मिलके मैंने सर्वे किया था 2011-12 में, तो 780 भाषाओं का होना देखने मिला। उनके नमूने मिले, उनके अलग अलग प्राणियों के, पंछियों के, वनस्पतियों के, वृक्षों के, दरिया के, पर्वत के, आकाश, तारा, तारका, उनके शब्द मिले, उनका व्याकरण मिला। और हमारे ग्रुप के हाथ से शायद 70-80 भाषाएं छूट भी गई थी, तो 850 भाषाएं मैंने अपनी सर्वे में होने का भरोसा किया है। उसका वास्तव प्रिंट मीडियम रिकॉर्डिंग के जरिए लाया है। पता नहीं कि इससे और भी भाषाएं है या नहीं है, लेकिन इन सब एस्टिमेट्स के आधार पे मैं ये कह सकता हूं कि आजादी के बाद के भारत में जितनी भाषाएं बोली गई जाती थी या भाषाएं बोली जाती है, वो दुनिया के भाषा वैभव में सबसे ज्यादा मात्रा में थी। इन अदर वर्ड्स, इंडिया इज द लैंग्वेज रिचेस्ट कंट्री। मैं ये नहीं कह रहा कि इसके लिए हमें कोई प्राइड होना चाहिए, लेकिन मैं ये कह रहा हूं कि ये संभव कैसे हुआ। ऐसे यहाँ क्या हुआ इस देश में कि इतनी भाषाएं आई। क्या हम हिंदी में शायद कहते हैं कि कोस कोस पे पानी बदले, चार कोस पे बानी वगैरह। इस तरह से क्या लोग बिल्कुल एक दूसरे से अपरिचित रहे थे इसलिए अलग अलग भाषाएं बोलते थे, या एक दूसरे से झगड़ते थे इसलिए एक ही कोई भाषा या कोई एक दो तीन भाषा में से ये भाषाएं बन गई? What is the secret of this great language diversity? मुझे ये जानने की बड़ी इच्छा थी और इसके लिए मैंने कुछ हमारे पहले का भाषाओं का इतिहास देखने का, समझने का प्रयास किया। सबसे पहले सवाल तो मेरे मन में ये था कि हमारे देश में बिल्कुल पहली बार जिसने बोला हो वो लोग कौन होंगे और कब होंगे। जैसे साहित्य के अभ्यास में कहा जाता है कि वाल्मीकि ने दो पंछियों का बिछड़ना देखा और बहुत व्यथित होके उनके मुंह से कविता निकल आई। पहली कविता, सभी कवियों में से प्रथम कवि माना गया उनको, वो बात कविता की हुई। लेकिन भाषाओं की बात करते हैं तो कब से और कौन लोग थे भाषाएं इस साउथ एशिया में बोल रहे थे? तो उसका जवाब है कि जब होमोसेपियंस पृथ्वी के अलग अलग इस साउथ ने का सिलसिला शुरू, अप्रोक्सीमेटली 65,000 years बिफोर आवर टाइम, 65,000 साल से लोग घूमते घूमते शायद दरिया किनारे से सबसे पहले तो साउथ इंडिया में, धीमे धीमे अंडमान में, वहां से फिर थोड़े ऊपर कुछ शिवालिक हिल्स में बसने लगे। उसके बाद दूसरा एक स्थलांतर का, मूवमेंट का, माइग्रेशन नहीं, मूवमेंट का, मूविंग का, घूमने का तबक्का आया, और वो शायद 45,000 years बिफोर आवर टाइम होगा। ये जेनेटिक्स हमें बता रहा है। ईरान, आज का ईरान, आज की टर्की, आज का इराक, अफगानिस्तान, उस रास्ते से लोग यहाँ आए और बसे। उन्होंने बाद में जाके बड़े बड़े शहर भी बनाए, जिसे हम इंडस सिविलाइजेशन कहते हैं। वहाँ वो शहर थे। वो भी समय हमारे से शायद 6,000 साल पहले से हमारे पहले 4,000 साल तक, और उसका पीक पीरियड माना गया है 2400 years बिफोर क्राइस्ट टू 1900 years बिफोर क्राइस्ट वगैरह। ये मैं इसलिए कह रहा हूं कि संस्कृत का इस देश में धीमे धीमे आना, जो 1400 साल पहले, क्राइस्ट के पहले, हमारे से 3500 साल पहले, 3,500 साल पहले हुआ, वो भाषा कहीं मध्य एशिया से घूमते घूमते थोड़ी ईरान की तरफ जाते जाते फिर नीचे अफगानिस्तान से होते होते यहाँ पहुंची थी। उस समय इस साउथ एशिया में पहले से ही बसे लोगों की अनेक भाषाएं थी। हम ये जानते हैं कि ऋग्वेद का निर्मिति काल 1400 साल बिफोर क्राइस्ट, 1400 years बिफोर क्राइस्ट माना गया है। तो गौतम बुद्ध ने 600-700 साल पहले, क्रिस्त के पहले, जब पाली जिसे कहा गया, ऐसी भाषाओं में उनकी फिलोसॉफी लोगों तक पहुंचाने का काम किया, तो उन भाषाओं का काफी विकास हो चुका था। इसीलिए वो भाषाएं फिलोसॉफी सहन कर सकी, झेल सकी, उठा सकी अपने कंधे पे और लोगों तक पहुंची। उसी तरह से महावीर की बात, जो बुद्ध के बहुत नजदीक के समय के है, प्राकृत भाषा में उनके टीचिंग्स लोगों तक पहुंचे, तो वो प्राकृत भी, जो संस्कृत नहीं थे, ऐसी भाषाएं चल रही थी, घूम रही थी, सर्कुलेशन में थी, लोग उसका इस्तेमाल करते थे। उसमें कविता भी होती थी, कहानियां भी होती थी, और इसीलिए बुद्ध के, गौतम के टीचिंग्स में कहानियां भी आती है। महावीर के साथ कहानियां जुड़ी है। उनके बाद आने वाले कुछ उनके शिष्यों ने बहुत सारी कहानियां उनके बारे में भी लिखी। ये फॉर्म्स अवेलेबल थे, और ये फॉर्म्स अचानक रातों रात तैयार नहीं होते। इसके लिए सदियों की साझी विरासत होने की जरूरत होती है। दक्षिण में द्रविडियन जिसे कहा गया है, ऐसी भाषाओं का चलन वलन, बहना, बढ़ना, उठना, फैलना, ये हुआ था। और उसमें से कुछ हिस्से के लोग उनकी भाषा लेके अफगानिस्तान तक पहुंच गए थे, कुछ उत्तर हिंदुस्तान में पहुंच गए थे, कुछ आज का जो ट्राइबल बेल्ट है वहां भी पहुंचे थे। तो जब संस्कृत यहाँ आई और उसमें बहुत अच्छी साहित्य की निर्मित हुई, मैं उनके शास्त्र और इंस्ट्रक्टिव लिटरेचर की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, इमेजिनेटिव लिटरेचर जैसे ओरल पोएम्स, जय इतिहास, जिसे बाद में भारत या उसके बहुत बाद महाभारत कहा गया, ऐसी लोगों के लिए बनाए रचनाएं होती थी। ये सब द्रविडिक भाषा यानी प्रोटो तमिल, प्रोटो पाली, प्रोटो प्राकृत, आज तक प्रोटो प्राकृत प्रोटो पाली के सिद्धांत बने नहीं, लेकिन वो बनाना बड़ा जरूरी है। और संस्कृत, या तो इंडो यूरोपियन, इंडो ईरानियन, या तो ओल्ड इंडिक, ये सब मिलजुल के हमारी फिलोसॉफिक, बौद्धिक, साहित्यिक और सामाजिक विरासत बनी है। हम मानते हैं कुछ पिछले 200 साल में कि संस्कृत से निकल के मराठी, गुजराती, नेपाली, बंगाली, उड़िया भाषाएं वगैरह वगैरह इंडो आर्यन भाषाएं बनी। लेकिन वो भाषाओं का असली रूप जानने के लिए एक मैं बहुत सिंपल शब्दों में कहूँ तो पिज्जा जैसा स्वरूप है। उसका बेस प्राकृत का है और टॉपिंग संस्कृत का है। मैं एक दो उदाहरण देना चाहता हूँ, लेकिन उससे ज्यादा लिंग्विस्टिक्स की तरफ आपको नहीं ले जाना चाहता। जैसे इंटीमेट पर्सनल प्रोनाउन जो होता है हर एक भाषा में यूनिक होता है। अंग्रेजी में जब हम ऐसा कोई वाक्य कहते हैं, वन इज नॉट वेरी फॉन्ड ऑफ हैविंग बॉइल्ड एग्स विथ that one standing for I, it can also be used ironically for others, he, she, it or they. ये इंटीमेट पर्सनल प्रोनाउन नॉर्मल हम, तुम, आप से अलग होता है शब्द, हर भाषा का यूनिक। अरे ये द्रविडिक पर्सनल प्रोनाउन ब्राहुई तक जाके हमारे हिंदी तक पहुंच गया है। हम कभी कभी मराठी में बोलते अरे कसा आहेस, और उसका फिर ज्यादा इमोटिव फॉर्म अरे रे कितना खराब हुआ। मैं ये कहने की कोशिश कर रहा हूं कि इसमें द्रविडिक पर्सनल इंटीमेट पर्सनल प्रोनाउन कब इंडो आर्यन से आए हुए हिंदी के साथ मिलजुल गया हम बता नहीं सकते। हमारे पूरे इतिहास में शायद होलोसीन के बाद, होलोसीन यानी अप्रोक्सीमेटली 9600 और 500 इयर्स बिफोर क्राइस्ट, पिछले 12000 साल के पूरे इतिहास में मेरी जानकारी में भाषाओं को लेके युद्ध हुए ऐसे मसले, ऐसे सिलसिले बहुत कम है। हाँ, हमारे यहाँ लैंग्वेज मूवमेंट्स हुए, जैसे आजादी के बाद तेलंगाना में, पंजाब में, महाराष्ट्र, यूनिफाइड महाराष्ट्र, ये लैंग्वेज मूवमेंट्स थी। लेकिन वो पूर्णतः लिंग्विस्टिक मूवमेंट्स नहीं थी। उसमें ज्योग्राफी का, उसमें पॉलिटिकल आइडेंटिटी का हिस्सा बहुत बड़ा था। इतनी सारी भाषाएं प्राचीन समय से, हड़प्पा में, मोहनजोदड़ो में कौन सी भाषा बोलते थे, कौन सी लिखते थे, हमें पता नहीं है, आज तक उसका कोई ठिकाना नहीं। लेकिन हम इतना जानते हैं बहुत ही स्पष्टता से कि वो संस्कृत नहीं थी। जो वहां संस्कृत बोली जाती थी या लिखी जाती थी ऐसा दिखाने पे तुले है, वो साइंस के दुश्मन है। इतना सभ्यता के और साइंस दोनों के दुश्मन है, इतना मैं कह सकता हूँ। इतनी सारी भाषाएं होने से हमारे देश में हमेशा लोग कम से कम बायलिंगुअल बोलते हैं। वो हिंदी बड़ी सरलता से समझ सकते हैं, बोल सकते हैं, वो भोजपुरी भी अच्छी तरह से समझ सकते हैं। राजस्थान में जाने से हड़ौती या मेवाड़ी या मेवाटी समझने में कोई दिक्कत, मुश्किल नहीं आती। इसलिए लैंग्वेज साइंटिस्ट, लिंग्विस्टिक फैमिलीज होती है, लैंग्वेज फैमिलीज वो अलग अलग होती है, म्यूचुअली नॉट इंटेलिजिबल रहती है, लेकिन हमें लिंग्विस्टिक एरिया कहा गया है. बाय एरिया दे डू नॉट मीन फिजिकल एरिया, but an area of semi-permeable which allows a person to traverse from one end to the other end without much difficulty. आप कहेंगे कि साहब आप तो केवल पाली, प्राकृत, संस्कृत, द्रविड़ की बात कर रहे हैं, तो ये 700 भाषा 800 भाषा कहाँ से आई? तो उसका एक कारण एंथ्रोपोलॉजी में मिलता है, और वो क्रिएशंस हुए. उस समय एक पॉपुलेशन नॉट KNOT, जहां 800 से 700 या 800 से ज्यादा व्यक्ति है, और उस इलाके में पर्याप्त मात्रा में अनाज या जानवर खाने को, जीने के लिए जरूरी है वो मिलता है, लोग वही ठहर गए. उनका जो स्थलांतर था वो वहां रुक गया. ऐसी बहुत सारी पॉपुलेशन नॉट्स बनती रही, और उससे मूल में एक भाषा हो या कुछ 2-3 भाषाओं का मिक्स वो इस्तेमाल करते हो, तो भी पॉपुलेशन नॉट्स बनने से एक ही भाषा की अनेक उपभाषाएं भी बनती गई. और दूसरा भी कारण रहा कि हमारे यहाँ खास करके हड़प्पन समय के बाद, हड़प्पन समय में, इंडस समय में, इंडस वैली सिविलाइजेशन में लेबर डिवीजन हुआ था, लेकिन जाति प्रथा जो हायरार्किक अरेंजमेंट है, कोई ऊपर कोई नीचे, कोई भगवान के ज्यादा नजदीक, कोई भगवान से ज्यादा दूर क्योंकि पिछले जन्म में पाप किया वगैरह वगैरह, ये होने से भी गई, और कम्युनिटी मिक्स होना कम हुआ. और जब ये कम्युनिटी मिक्स होना कम होता है तो भी लोकल लैंग्वेजेस की संख्या बढ़ती रहती है. ये सब कारण केवल इंटरनली, लेकिन और सांस्कृतिक विरासत कहाँ से नहीं है. आज अगर मैं एशिया का मैप देखूं तो यहाँ हमें स्पिरिचुअल और मटेरियल दोनों तरीके, सांस्कृतिक तरीके, मेथड्स एंड मैटर हमें पहुंचे हैं. मंगोलिया से यहाँ हमारे पास संस्कृति पहुंची है. ये मध्य एशिया की बात मैं कर रहा हूँ. चीन का और हमारा जुड़ के रहना, ये तो आप सब जानते ही है. बुद्धिज्म की भी बात है, और बहुत सारा लिटरेचर ट्रांसलेट हुआ वहां से यहाँ, यहाँ से वहां. वहां के प्रवासी यहाँ आए, यहाँ के प्रवासी वहां गए, उनके एक दूसरे के बारे में लिखा गया. और वेस्टर्न एशिया में सीरिया, टर्की, ईरान, इराक, अफगानिस्तान, सभी जगह से हमें सांस्कृतिक विरासत मिली. जैसे अर्मेनियन भाषा पुराने समय की, प्राचीन अर्मेनियन, उसमें से हमारे वेद प्रकट हो सके. और अगर वो विरासत ना होती तो वेद कुछ अलग ढंग से बनते. अगर घोड़ा जो स्टेपिस से, सेंट्रल एशिया से नहीं आता यहाँ, तो महाभारत अलग ढंग का बनता. इसके अलावा हमने भाषाओं के और यहाँ के हर भाषा का कुछ न कुछ हिस्सा हमने स्वीकारा है. जैसे हमारे शस्त्र, आर्म्स, मिलिट्री इक्विपमेंट के ज्यादातर शब्द, मिलिट्री ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के ज्यादातर शब्द अरेबिक, कुछ पोर्तुगीज से आए हैं. हमारे मशीनों के साथ पेश आने के बहुत सारे शब्द अंग्रेजी में से आए हैं. हमारे भगवान के साथ संबंध रखने के बहुत सारे शब्द ओल्ड ईरानियन और संस्कृत से आए हैं। नदियों के, पानी के, पंछियों के, मछलियों के शब्द हमें लोकल लैंग्वेजेस से मिले हैं। कहां से शब्द यहाँ स्थलांतर करते आए और स्थिर हो गए, ये बताना भी मुश्किल होगा। इस तरह के लिंग्विस्टिक हेरिटेज की इज्जत, उसका सम्मान समझते हुए जिन्होंने हमारी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बनाई, उस कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली ने, संविधान सभा ने भाषाओं के प्रश्न पे यूरोप से आए नेशनलिस्ट आइडियाज को पूरी तरह से नकारा था। यूरोप में नेशनलिज्म, एक भाषा वाला देश, इस रूप में देखा गया था, खास करके बाद में जहां फैसिज्म बढ़ा, ऐसे जर्मनी में और इटली में। आयरलैंड में वो तरीका नहीं था, वहां सेल्टिक और दोनों स्वीकारे गए थे। और यहाँ तक कि जोन ऑफ आर्क की जो भाषा है ब्रिटनी, वो ऑफिशियली फ्रांस में स्वीकारी गई थी। वी शुड नेवर फॉरगेट दैट। जहां से लिबर्टीज की आइडिया है, फ्रांस और आयरलैंड, वहां ये प्रॉब्लम नहीं था। लेकिन जर्मनी और इटली जो बाद में फैसिस्ट देश बने, वहां एक भाषा का बहुत मुद्दा चला था। लेकिन हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली ने वो मुद्दा नकारा और 1920 से बहुभाषिक स्वतंत्र आजाद भारत होगा, ये तय हुआ। हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में 8वां शेड्यूल बना, उसमें उस समय 14 भाषाओं का नाम था, आज 22 भाषाओं का है। मैं कहता हूँ हिंदुस्तान के, भारत के हर भाषा का नाम उसमें होना चाहिए। या तो मैं ये भी कहता हूँ कि शेड्यूल होने की कोई जरूरत नहीं, जो भाषा है लोग निर्माण करते, सही बनाते लोगों। इट इज द मोस्ट डेमोक्रेटिक सिस्टम ऑफ मीनिंगफुल सिस्टम ऑफ मीनिंग्स दैट ह्यूमंस हैव क्रिएटेड, and it is the foundation of civilization, because the only bridge between the human consciousness and the phenomenal world, the external world, is language. When we have words, we can create the world. The word creates the world, not in a metaphoric sense, literally. That is what happens. तो हमारे में ये स्वीकारा गया कि ये देश बहुभाषा था। हमारा जो जोग्राफिक टेरिटोरियल दिशा से नहीं है, भाषा ये भी उसमें एक बहुत बड़ी डायमेंशन है। और इसीलिए हमारे सरकारी व्यवहारों में हर भाषा का सम्मान करना, ये कम से कम प्रिंसिपल तो रहा है। प्रैक्टिस रही है कि नहीं वो बात अलग है। वेयर इट इज पॉसिबल रही होगी, वेयर इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल वो होना चाहिए। आज इस साझी विरासत को बारूद लगाने का काम शुरू है। इसमें 2 बहुत अहम मुद्दे समझने जैसे। पहला मुद्दा है कि ये दिखाने की साजिश या कोशिश है कि यहाँ जो भी आया वो संस्कृत से आया। मैं संस्कृत से बहुत प्यार करता हूँ। आई जस्ट लव द लैंग्वेज। मैं अगर समय हो तो एक के पीछे एक संस्कृत की कितनी कविता है मैं रिसाइट कर पाऊंगा। बड़ी अच्छी लगती है भाषा मुझे, लेकिन बड़ी क्रिएटिव भाषा है, रिसोर्सफुल है। लेकिन मुझे ये नहीं अच्छा लगता कि हमारी सांची विरासत भुलाने के लिए और कुछ लोगों को वो बाहरी है ये दिखाने के लिए केवल संस्कृत ही संस्कृत ये हमारा मूल स्रोत है ये दिखाना, मैं उसको उसकी कड़ी निंदा करता हूं। ये सच्चाई नहीं है। इस देश की, इस भूखंड की, इस साउथ एशिया की सच्चाई नहीं है। मैं तो यहाँ तक कहूंगा, हम म्यूजिक के बारे में सुनेंगे ही कुछ ही मिनटों में, लेकिन मैं जब हिस्सा तो मैं ग का गंधार, यानी मैं ये मानता हूँ कि अफगानिस्तान की म्यूजिकल परंपरा हमने स्वीकारी है। गंधार ट्रेडिशन ऑफ साउंड, ट्रीटमेंट ऑफ साउंड्स। संस्कृत इज द सोल, द ओनली सोर्स। ये कहना उतना ही गलत होगा जितना Eve and Adam are the only source of human generation creation होगा। और दूसरी गलत बात जो प्रैक्टिस में है वो है हिंदी के बारे में। पिछले सेंसस में हिंदी बोलने वालों की संख्या 52 करोड़ दिखाई गई थी। मैंने जब देखा कि, और अच्छा लगता है कि हिंदी इतनी बड़ी मात्रा में बोली जाती है, दुनिया की सबसे ज्यादा संख्या में बोलने वाले भाषाओं के पहले प्रथम 7 भाषाओं में हिंदी का नंबर है। आई फील वेरी प्राउड ऑफ दैट। लेकिन मैंने थोड़ा नजदीकी से देखा, थोड़ा मेरे स्पेक्टिकल्स चढ़ा के कागज पे देखा, तो उसमें देखने मिला कि सेंसस में जिन लोगों ने कहा था कि फलानी हमारी मातृभाषा, ऐसे 62 अन्य भाषिक ग्रुप्स के हिंदी में डाले गए थे। जैसे कि भोजपुरी 5 करोड़ 3 लाख व्यक्तियों ने कहा था कि वो हमारी मातृभाषा है, लेकिन वो हिंदी में डाली गई। कुमाऊनी, गढ़वाली उत्तराखंड की भाषा है। हिमाचल प्रदेश की सभी भाषाएं, फिर वो लाहौल स्पीति की हो, कुल्लू मनाली की हो, कांगड़ा की हो, जहां की भी हो, प्लेस्ड अंडर हिंदी। राजस्थान की तो सभी भाषाएं उसमें डाली। छत्तीसगढ़ की छत्तीसगढ़ी भाषा, ये ज्यादा आदिवासी गोंडी संस्कृति से, भिल्ली संस्कृति से आई। यहां तक कि महाराष्ट्र में पावरी नाम की पावरा लोग रहते हैं, उनकी पावरी भाषा होते हैं, और वो पावरा लोग हिंदी समझते भी नहीं, उनकी भी भाषा हिंदी में डाली गई है। ये बड़ा चढ़ा के कहना, हिंदी बोलने वालों की संख्या बड़ी करना, ये हमारे फेडरलिज्म को भी ठेस पहुंचाता है और हमारे भाषा के प्यार को भी ठेस पहुंचाता है। और उससे भी, ये तो मुद्दे पार्लियामेंट में उठाने के मुद्दे है, फेडरलिज्म वगैरह वगैरह, लैंग्वेज राइट, लेकिन जो छोटी छोटी भाषा बोलने वाले लोग हैं, उनकी आमदनी, उनकी जीवनी चलाने का उनका जो एहसास है, कॉन्फिडेंस है, उसको ठेस पहुंचती है। क्योंकि फिर उनके भाषा में उनको शिक्षा नहीं मिलती, उनके भाषा में व्यवसाय नहीं मिलता, वहां से स्थलांतर करना पड़ता है। कभी मेहरबान साहब ने अचानक आधी रात में लॉकडाउन कर दिया तो पैदल 300-400 किलोमीटर उनको वापस चलना पड़ता है, रास्ते में मर जाते हैं, पटरी पे मर जाते हैं। छोटी छोटी भाषा मारना ये हमारे लिए अच्छा नहीं है। इट इज नॉट गुड इकोनॉमिक्स, क्योंकि जहां भाषा बोलता है वहां इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी ज्यादा चलती है। इट इज नॉट गुड हिस्ट्री, क्योंकि हमारा इतिहास भाषा वैभव का, भाषा विपुलता का इतिहास रहा है। इट इज नॉट गुड पॉलिटिक्स, क्योंकि हमारी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन कहती है कि सबसे दुर्बल है उसे ज्यादा सहारा देना चाहिए। साथियों, भाषा विविधता के सामने कुछ हमारे दोस्त भी खड़े रहते हैं। वो कहते हैं कि इतनी सारी भाषा गरीब देश के लिए कैसा चलेगा, हम पिछड़े रहेंगे। लेट मी टेल यू समथिंग। जब न्यूरोलॉजी का अभ्यास करने वाले, कॉग्निटिव साइंसेस का अभ्यास करने वाले कुछ एक्सपर्ट्स ने देखा कि जिन्हें भाषाओं के बारे में बहुत दुर्बलता है, और जिसे ऑटिस्टिक या भाषा के बारे में अक्षमता है, ऐसे बच्चों का अभ्यास करने पे उन साइंटिस्ट ने ये बताया कि उत्क्रांति के प्रक्रिया में हमेशा जहां विविधता है वहां प्रक्रिया आगे जाने का, गतिमानता से आगे जाने का मौका है। अगर वो विविधता कम हो तो उत्क्रांति की प्रक्रिया, एवोल्यूशन की प्रोसेस ठंडी पड़ जाएगी, धीमी चलेगी। और इसलिए ये बायो नेचुरल इफेक्ट ऑफ द नीड फॉर evolutionary forward going ahead requires people of all use, all various linguistic abilities. और ये जो भाषा से बाधित कुछ बच्चे थे, उनमें से बहुत सारे ज्यादा टैलेंटेड भी निकले, ये भी देखा गया। मैं उस विषय में, इट इज रिलेटेड टू कॉग्निटिव साइंसेस एंड एजुकेशन, मैं उसमें उतरता नहीं हूँ, लेकिन इस समय अपनी बात खत्म करते मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि हमारे राष्ट्रगीत से लेके कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन तक, हमारे दक्षिण से लेके उत्तर तक, पूर्व से लेके पश्चिम तक, देश में हर कोई जानता है कि भाषा संवाद के लिए, भाषा एक दूसरे का स्वीकार करने के लिए बहुत जरूरी है। अगर उसे हम नकारें तो उसका नतीजा होगा स्कॉर्न और हेट्रेड बढ़ेंगे, नफरत बढ़ेगी। नफरत की आंधी में बहुत सारे लोग इस समय जल रहे हैं। भाषाओं को कुचलना, भाषाओं को नकारना, ये वही बात होगी जो किसी का नकाब निकालने पे उसे कंपेल करना, जो द्रौपदी के साथ वस्त्रहरण हुआ था। आज वो कोई पर्दा उठाने की बात हो रही है कर्नाटक में, मैं जहां बैठा हूं। भाषाओं को नकारना, वो बात भी उसी के समान है। और इसकी सेंसिटिविटी अगर हम रखें और भाषा विविधता का हम सम्मान करने को सीखें, तो हम सच्चे भारतीय हो सकते हैं। मुझे इससे ज्यादा आपके साथ शेयर करने के लिए कभी दोबारा मौका मिला तो जरूर चाहूंगा, लेकिन इस समय मैं अपनी बात पूरी करता हूं। और शबनम जी को एक बार फिर से मैं दुआ करना चाहता हूं, धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूं कि ऐसे विषय पे भी बोलने के लिए उन्होंने मुझे बुलाया। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
थैंक यू वेरी मच गणेश जी। आपने क्योंकि हिंदी में ज्यादातर अपनी बात कही, तो इसलिए मैं 2-4 मिनट लेके इसका थोड़ा अंग्रेजी में ट्रांसलेशन कर देती हूँ, ताकि जो लोग नहीं आपको पूरी तरह समझ पाए, वो भी आपके ज्ञान का पूरा लाभ उठा सके। तो very briefly, Professor Devi said many very, very erudite things, and he's spanned across the whole panorama of Indian history, right from the prehistoric times till now, and showed us that the origins of language in India go back to about 65,000 years before our time, and that first speakers were most likely found in South India, in Andamans and in the Shivaliks. And then from around 45,000 years before our time, people started coming in from Iran, Turkey, Afghanistan. And then it was the Indus Valley civilization around 6,000 to 4,000 years before us, where we had, in a very developed form, a language, but that was not of Sanskrit origin. We'll get back to that. Then Sanskrit came in around 3,500 years ago, and it came in from Middle Asia, from Iran, from Afghanistan, different routes. And by then, people in India already had many languages. So here we are already getting a lot of diversity and a lot of mixing that is going on. So that by the time we come into the first millennium before Christ, and the big landmark is the Buddha. We have his teachings are to be found in Pali, which of course has very clear links with Sanskrit. But for Mahavir, who was also roughly around the same time, it is Prakrit in which we find his teachings, which is not of Sanskrit origin. So again, enormous diversity. In South India, we had, of course, where the Dravidian languages originated, developed, spread, flowered, and some of them even reached far into North India, into Afghanistan, and into the tribal belt in central India. From Sanskrit, then we had branches, so many languages developed from that, right across northern India, from Marathi stretching away all the way across to Bengali, what are called the Indo-Aryan languages. And he made a very interesting formulation. He said it is to be seen in the shape of a pizza, where the base is Prakrit and the topping is of Sanskrit. I hope I got you right, Professor Devi. And he also says that it's very interesting that that if you look at the intimate personal pronoun in the Sanskrit and Sanskrit origin languages, it is from a Dravidic origin. And that is fascinating. It just shows that within these languages, how much mixing is going on. There is no notion of purity. He also made a very interesting formulation. He said in history, we have not had wars around language. We've had movements for linguistic states, but he said their language is mixed up with other identities, geographical, with politics, with other issues of identity formation. It is not, language has not been something that human beings have, fought very serious battles over, and at least in history. He also makes a very clear-cut assertion that the Indus Valley script, unlike what is being sought to be argued today by politically motivated people, the origins of the Indus Valley script are definitely not in Sanskrit. Anybody trying to prove that is being unscientific, going against any rationality, any logic, any science, anything that we know so far. He also says that the reason why we have so much linguistic diversity in India is he brings in a concept of what he calls population knots. The population is in knots, so people tend to coalesce around certain areas, and then languages develop. Areas which can sustain a group, can provide water, can provide animals, can provide plant life, then people tend to live in those areas. He also brings in the notion that perhaps the inequality, the distinctions between different groups may also have contributed. He didn't use the word caste system, but maybe he was indicating that or not, I don't know. Also produces this kind of tendency to have multiple linguistic expressions. He gave us the example of how, all languages owe something to each other, and how you find that in Sanskrit also you will find, or in Indian languages you will find, the place from where things come, they bring their words along with them. Like words of military origin usually have Arabic, Portuguese sources. Relationship with God, he says, is very often expressed through words which have a Sanskritic origin. Things relating to water, fish, and associated forms will tend to be more from local languages. Then coming to the absolutely contemporary period, he says our constitution and our constituent assembly very clearly chose not to base the idea of the Indian nation on any notion of language. It rejected that, and it accepted 14 languages in what is a schedule. It could and should have many more, or there shouldn't be a schedule at all. But anyway, what is most important in the constitution is the notion that we need to respect all languages. And now he says he is very worried because this whole syncretic heritage of language is being sought to be blown up. The word he used was usko barood lagaya ja raha hai, very strong, evocative word. And he says among the false notions which are being propagated is that everything came from Sanskrit. This whole notion of everything has a Sanskrit origin, he says, is as wrong as the notion that all human beings have originated from Adam and Eve. He also says this trend of trying to blow up, to inflate the numbers of Hindi speakers is very wrong, very dangerous, and very harmful for the languages which are sought to be absorbed into Hindi. And he says in the last census, for example, Bhojpuri, Kumauni, Garhwali, languages of Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Himachal Pradesh, including, he mentioned a language, I couldn't quite catch the name, in Maharashtra, where the people don't know Hindi at all, are all included, swept under this carpet of Hindi in order to show that Hindi is, in a sense, the great language of India. And he says that this is not just bad for the languages. Of course it is. It deprives people of livelihoods because economies, people live around languages in linguistically cohesive areas. And this is destructive, not just of languages, not just of identities, but much more than that. He also says that this is bad politics because this then tries to divide people and deny us our cultural heritage. And also, I think one of the very important points he makes is that the research in cognitive sciences has shown that linguistic diversity is a necessary prerequisite for progressive evolution. And in fact, we know that many linguists have studied how children who actually speak multiple languages, their mental development, their brains develop much faster than in other cases. So for all kinds of reasons, Professor Devi has argued that we need to protect and preserve and cherish our linguistic diversity rather than try to homogenize it in the name of whatever great future that we are told awaits us if only we can become one language, one nation, one vote, one tax. That is not the way India was ever conceived, and that is not the way India will ever survive. I'm adding my own little two-bit to that. Thank you very much, Professor Devi.
So Mukherjee, your memory is absolutely mind-blowing. I never had a chairperson who remembered every word, despite my my terrible bad Hindi. I mean, I was using a language on which I had no command at all, and I must have slipped so many times and not said what I wanted to say. I have not met anybody in my life with memory that you have. I had so.
I hope my claim to being a historian is not only based on memory.
No, I mean, history, all right, professional history, genealogy, whatever, criminal lawyer, anything. But this kind of memory is absolutely phenomenal, and I must publicly acknowledge that I have never met a person with, because you not missed any word except one, and that I'll repeat. The name of the language from Maharashtra is Paura. Paura. They play flute, and therefore they are called Pauras. But really, I am. I just don't know.
I don't think I must confess that I relied a lot on my notes. So my quick handwriting contributed.
Whatever may be the secret of it, but it is extraordinary. I feel flattered to be part of the panel. And sorry for taking a little too long in completing what I had to say, but India is a linguistic civilization, and in order to speak about it, I had just about adequate time. Thank you very much. Thank you indeed for your kind words. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure listening to you and being able to repeat your message. I would now invite my dear friend, Madan Gopal Singh, to speak to us, to sing for us, and whatever else he wants to do for us. Madan Gopal Singh is not only has spent his life, like many of us, teaching students. He taught English literature at the University of Delhi for many years. He's an alumnus of the same university to which I belong, JNU. We go back a very long way. And I was delighted to have him as a senior fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. I can assure you enlivened the place in more ways than one when I was there as the director. He is a singer, a lyricist, an actor, a screenwriter, a film theorist, a composer, editor. He's written scripts for films. He has a group, a music group called Char Yaar, 4 Friends, to whom we have been listening with great pleasure, as well as great learning a lot from them for the last many years. And he has composed and sung the poetry of Rumi, of Shah Hussain, Sultan Bahu, Bulle Shah, and I could go on, including of poets from languages other than Indian languages, Bertolt Brecht, John Lennon, etc. And as I said, he embodies in his work and in himself the syncretic tradition. In fact, if I would say that I have learned about the Indian syncretic tradition, particularly in poetry and music, if I've learned from anybody, it's been from Madan over the years. He has always made that learning also very, very pleasurable. Madan.
जनाब, तो सबसे पहले तो मेरा सब दोस्तों को सलाम पहुंचे, और मैं खास तौर पे अपनी उस्तानी मृदुला और अपनी दोस्त शबनम और अभी प्रोफेसर देवी, जिनका के I mean, I was amazed at the kind of cultural map of cultural mobility which he laid out, the macro sort of cultural mobility. And it's not just mobility, but there are many sort of layers of journeys that have been happening across time, across territories, and so on and so forth. तो सबसे पहले तो मैं यहीं से शुरू करता हूँ, और इनकी खास तौर पे जो इनकी एक्टिविज्म है और डाइवर्सिटी के लिए, सिंक्रेटिक ट्रेडिशन के लिए, हमारी साझी विरासत के लिए, उसको अपना सलाम पेश करता हूँ। अब मैं अपनी बात शुरू करता हूँ जो मेरी प्रैक्टिस से जुड़ी हुई है। तो मेरी प्रैक्टिस में मतलब 3 फेजेस हैं, और उनमें से अगर कोई इंसाइट निकलता है तो देन आई विल be happy if I'm able to make some sense. So the thing is that there are 2 cities that immediately sort of kind of appear to me as being seminally formative cities as far as I'm concerned. एक शहर तो है अमृतसर का, जिसका मतलब which started coming up in the 16th century. And I have, which is where I was born. And I have another city, which is where I lived right from the very beginning. And that is Delhi. And Delhi is a city which is perpetually under construction. So when I say that it is perpetually under construction, sort of what kind of, construction it is. So that is a kind of a very fascinating study whenever I sort of get into that. My own sort of relationship with this city has to do with a refugee colony, which is where my family settles down. And though I'm not a Midnight's children, one of the Midnight children, I grew up in that refugee colony, which is where we have a range of Punjabis from various parts of what was once their home on the other side of Punjab. अब यहाँ पे बड़ी एक दिलचस्प चीज हो रही है कि there is a great deal of tension even amongst the groups that have settled down there. The tension has to do with, let's say, there are at least 6 or 7 dialects being spoken there of Punjabi. So there are people who have come from Multan, there are people who have come from the kind of borders of Balochistan and Punjab, from Quetta, people who have come from the Saraiki region, people who have come from the Majha region. So people have sort of, been completely dislodged. They have been sort of, robbed of the home which was theirs once. And now they are kind of coming together in a space where they have to engage with people who are speaking dialects which are not exactly the dialects which they had sort of, grew up with. Uski jo tensions hain, wo palpable thi to begin with. And I'm talking of Karol Bagh in Delhi. And we're talking of Naibalan in Delhi. What we don't see in those streets is the Muslim presence. And although there is one Dakhana Wali Gali where there is one mosque, and I remember as a child going through the street, the doors of the mosque are shut, and I do not recall seeing Muslims ever. अच्छा, तो अब यहाँ ये बात पैदा होती है कि हम इस इन टेंशन्स को ओवरकम कैसे करते हैं. Now this is an interesting thing because we children who are born, let's say 3-4 years after the independence of India, we meet, and our meetings are a kind of a stitch. So it's a kind of a stitch between one dialect and another. And there is a game which is an inclusive game, and that stitch will, in a way, create a sense of consolidation. Now, this is something that our parents, not mine necessarily, they were very, very inclusive, but people would come and who had suffered a lot of trauma. तो उन लोगों का जो है ट्रॉमा को पार से पार जाने का जो तरीका था वो थे बच्चे. Delhi was also a city which was in the making, which was being kind of rebuilt. So the one stitch, let's say, of our cultural imagination or of our sort of, the existential imagination, the recent imagination was a person called Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru. So everyone, जितने भी बच्चे थे, वो नेहरू को चाचा के नाम से जानते थे. And there was a larger cosmology that we had inherited in which we were living in. So उसमें क्या था कि we had heard of a Bapu. By the time we came around, he had been shot dead by somebody who was a rigid upholder and a kind of upholder of religious identity politics. But we knew of a Bapu, and we knew of a Chacha, we knew of a Maulana, we knew of a Sardar. And when we are going by these terms, we have an idea of a family. Now, and I really, initially, the way we imagined this space was imagined through this family. And this family actually sort of, went back to a huge struggle And in that also we had figures of Bhagat Singh, and we have many others. Usme ek to ye tha. And the other thing was the government school that we were visiting, and we suddenly discovered that Punjab was not the only thing. Majha region is not the only thing. The Saraiki region is not the only thing. That the language spoken by these Baluchis which was sort of close to Punjabi, but not quite, was not the only thing. That we were for the first time being exposed to, let's say, people from Rajasthan, people from UP, also from Bengal. उस जमाने में WA एक ऐसा एरिया था जहां पे बंगालीज और ये क्या कहते हैं जिनको हम South Indians, they were coming and so there is the school was in that sense creating a kind of a larger thread of reaching out, of assimilation. That is the second thing. Of course, I've mentioned Delhi, which was a city being created as part of a vision which will represent in a kind of a micro form the larger macro image of India. So there were all kinds of people coming to Delhi. It was still sort of, kind of in its nascent stage, but we could see. So Delhi was like a kind of, जैसे कहते हैं spasmodic town. कि आप चले करोल बाग से, you come to the Buddha garden, suddenly you have forests, and Buddha garden khatam hota hai, तो you come to the Kent and suddenly you have something coming up there. RK Puram is coming up, and see this whole idea of a vision which was sort of which was in the process. इसी जमाने के अंदर हम ये गाना सुनते हैं, मान लीजिए. और third thing was the film song. The film song is the most important stitch at that time. वो क्यों ऐसा stitch है, उसकी एक वजह है, मैं आपको एक दो वजह बताता हूँ. 1947 is that culmination of the violence, the concomitant violence that sort of, was going on when we were also beginning to experience a newly sort of independent India and its future that we are talking about. तो उस ट्रॉमा से निकलना कैसे? हम बच्चों को किसी ने, मेरे घर में किसी ने कहानी नहीं सुनाई. I'm sure there were other houses where these stories were sort of kind of emotionally sort of very overwhelming. But we children would listen to film songs, and film songs में क्या हो रहा था उस वक्त? तो मेरे ज़हन में दो गाने आते हैं. मान लीजिए मैं एक गाने का जिक्र करूंगा जो कि श्रीमान 420 से है, राज कपूर फिल्म, and it's about it's a song which is happening in a tea shop, and it is raining incessantly, and there is a kind of a boy who's come from the village and is still looking, doesn't have a foothold. He's trying to earn his livelihood, but is not exactly very successful. और एक लड़की है जो शायद वहीं की रहने वाली है, जिसके पास थोड़ा सा फुटहोल्ड है, जिसके पास थोड़ी सी कुछ छोटा मोटा पैसा है. वहां मिल रहे हैं एक चाय की दुकान में, और लड़के के पास पैसा नहीं है चाय के लिए, तो वो एक कप मंगाते हैं चाय का, और एक कप चाय का मंगा के एंड देन उसके पीछे फिर ये गाना शुरू होता. बरसात हो रही है बहुत ज्यादा. वो गाना है, प्यार हुआ इकरार हुआ, प्यार से फिर क्यों डरता है दिल, कहता है दिल रास्ता मुश्किल, मालूम नहीं है कहां मंजिल. अब ये this is amazing because there are two registers simultaneously opening up. One is about the romance between a boy and a girl, which is just taking off, and they're coming from two different and diverse backgrounds. The other is that this song could also be about the newly independent India. कहता है दिल रास्ता मुश्किल, मालूम नहीं है कहां मंजिल. For us, this was quite a song. Although as a child, I didn't realize what all was going on. But eventually it became clear. You know, if we were to go earlier back and we were to look at a film that was released in 1949, and there is a song which has an ad-lib, kind of introduction, which goes on for about 2 minutes and 53 seconds. And this is absolutely unique. And what is it? It says, खामोश जमाना चुपचाप है नजारे आराम से है दुनिया बेकल है दिल के मारे ऐसे में कोई आहट इस तरह आ रही है जैसे कि चल रहा हो दिल में कोई हमारे और दिल धड़क रहा है इस आस के सहारे आएगा 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 आने वाला आएगा. Now, you know, this is most fascinating because the film is happening in Allahabad. It is fascinating also because the film is happening in a almost a Gothic mansion, which is named Sangam Bhavan. It is also interesting because in that building, the man who is trying to understand this mysterious voice of the woman is completely westernized. Wears a felt hat and a kind of a three-piece suit with a tie and all that. Now, could it be a song about Nehru? Could it be a song about Anand Bhavan? Why are we going back to Allahabad? And how is that man who's rooted in sort of, Western education and etiquette is now going to eventually sort of, become, aware of this mystery sound which is chasing him? The name of the woman is Kamini, and this is the new desire. And a lot of work which is happening at that time is happening through the agency of the woman. This is important. It started happening very concretely from the time of Tagore. I mean, if you look at Ghore Baire, and if you look at Char Adhyay, if you look at Nostanid, if you look at Gora, then you will find that Tagore is very keen to give it the agency of the now awakening to modernity. And the agency is given to women and not so much to men. तो हम इस माहौल में जो हैं जब देख रहे हैं कि मुस्लिम सोशल्स खत्म हो चुके हैं बिल्कुल. यानी एक फिल्म है from 1947 to 1960 there is only one film जिसको आप कह सकते हैं कि उसके अंदर मुसलमान कैरेक्टर है, but it's not a Muslim social. That is a film on Mirza Ghalib. कोई बात नहीं हो रही है. तो how are we keeping the forgotten sort of, registers which are part of the household in which I'm growing up? How are we keeping those cultural registers alive? That is something that we as children are witnessing at two levels. One is that Guru Granth Sahib, I'm born into a Sikh family. Guru Granth Sahib is recited by my mother and by my grandmother early in the morning when we are all sort of, under the quilt. And Guru Granth Sahib is a book which is sort of, which has a threads going all the way to Bengal, to Orissa, to Central India, to Maharashtra, to Punjab, to Sindh, and even to, down south. So, the point is that we are part of a book. We hear it being recited every day. And it has poetry of people like Baba Farid, and a substantial part. It's not just simple, one or two hymns. And of Kabir and of Bhikan Shah, and of people from various other sort of, caste combinations. So this is a book which is about the stitches, the inclusivity. And this is the organic sort of, background of which we are part. Now I just take it to popular culture. In the popular culture at that time, we do witness what? We witness the emergence. In fact, they were all there. It's not even an emergence. Tahir was there. Majru was there. Kaifi was there. Shailendra was there. Raja Mehndi Ali Khan was there. S.H. Bihari was there. And then there were musicians like Naushad was there. And Ghulam Haider earlier was there. And Khwaja Khurshid Anwar was there earlier. And after partition, we also have Khayyam, we have Sajjad, we have, of course, along with that, we have kind of, Madan Mohan, and we have S.D. Burman, and we have Salil Chowdhury, and we have Hemant Kumar, and so on and so forth. The interesting part is that when, let's say, S.D. Burman, who doesn't understand Urdu all that much, and he's creating a song in a film called Kagaz Ke Phool. The song is sung by Geeta Dutt. The song is written by Kaifi Azmi. And the song is a, kind of, it's in Hindustani, but it's the kind of Hindustani which is now going out of vogue. Now, there is a certain sort of, something else that is happening, to which Professor Devi has drawn our attention, and that's very disturbing. The song is Waqt ne kiya kya hasi sitam, tum rahe na tum, hum rahe na hum. Now, if you look at the way that song has been created by somebody who's come from the Tripura Bengali sort of, background, who does not understand Urdu that much. So there is a kind of a marriage that is happening between Urdu and a melody in which that kind of nazm has never been sung before. So suddenly you find that this register of melody from Tripura Bengal is coming and creating a stitch with a nazm which is written in Urdu, and creating a new sort of, new thing which is absolutely haunting. Of course, it is haunting also because of Guru Dutt. It is haunting also because of Geeta Dutt. It is haunting also because of Mr. Murthy, who's created those very beautiful lighting sort of patterns and so on and so forth. मेरा ये कहने का मतलब है कि इस किस्म की syncretism, इस किस्म की natural sort of inclusivity, जिस पे आपका ध्यान भी नहीं जाएगा, because it's so organic and so natural. That was the crux. That's where we were beginning. And this is what we were listening to. And इसमें अगर मैं मतलब अगर एग्जाम्पल देने लगूं तो ये तो 3-4 घंटे की वो जो हो जाएगी. लेकिन so I am now moving slightly away from this. Of course, at that time there were festivals, there were other things that were happening. My father was, of course, a scholar and a poet. तो घर में किताबें बहुत थी. So we are, kind of sort of, waking up to many influences, and I was not the only one. I went to a school, which is Khalsa school, which was not kind of, उसमें ये नहीं था कि आपको जो है कुछ secular तो था, लेकिन उसके अंदर हमारे पास what is known as moral instruction, हम उसको धार्मिक का period कहते थे. So we had 2 classes every week of धार्मिक. उसमें कुछ नहीं होता था सिवाय इसके कि आपको ये बताया जाता था कि सिखों के साथ कितनी जाति हुई है और जाति करने वाले लोग कौन थे. conveniently forgetting that we had a very different set of relationships. For, I'll just give you one example. If you look at the festival of Lodi, the festival of Lodi has to do with Abdullah Bhatti, who's from the Pindi area. And this is not really a Muslim festival. This is the festival of the Hindus and the Sikhs. So what is the anthem? Anthem is Sundar Mundariye Ho. It's a kind of a, Ho is, it's coming in a kind of a chorus. Sundar Mundariye is the lead singer who will be singing Sundar Mundariye. Sundar Mundariye Ho, Tera Kaun Bichara Ho, Dulla Patti Wala Ho. Sundar Mundariye Ho, हिंदू लड़की है जो ऑर्फन है. तेरा कौन बेचारा हो? Who is there to look after you? And he says, don't worry, Dulla Patti Wala ho. Dulla Patti Wala is there, na? Dulle Ti Vyai ho. He is going to take care of you and he will be one day sending you off in marriage somewhere else. Ser Shakkar Pai hu. He will also take care of what all is to be given with you. The paraphernalia. Kurita Lal Pataka ho. She was really a stunner. Kurita Salu Pata ho. But she was poor. Salu Kon Samete ho. So who will stitch that Salu back? वो करते करते उसमें आखिर में लाइन जाती है चाचा चूरी कुट्टी हो. The chacha then created that sweet sort of bread soaked in ghee. Zimidara lutti ho. People who owned the land, the entitled landed aristocracy, they looted that food that was created by the chacha. Dulla Patti क्या करता है? Dulla Patti Zimidar Sadaye ho. He got the Zimidars, the aristocratic lord, dragged to the middle of the village. Gin pole laaye ho. And he then dispensed his kind of justice. Now, it's very interesting that this is happening at a time when Abdullah Bhatti was already in some form of a conflict with the other Muslim, a ruler. Here is one, ruler. Here is one sort of, local sort of chieftain standing up to the state in defense of, not just the Hindus, but also the Muslims. The fellow eventually got killed. It's interesting that this fellow, the day he was hanged, the Sufi poet Shah Hussain was there as a witness to the hanging. So when you are trying to get into under the skin of the Sufi poetry, you will find all kinds of sort of, inclusions, embeddings, and these are very, very fascinating sort of, things. I'll give you an example of a long poem by Khwaja Ghulam Farid. In between, he says, वो कहता है कि बलराम जसोदा नंद कहूं. What do I call you? बलराम जसोदा नंद कहूं, तेनु किसन कन्हैया कान कहूं. Who are you? तेनु बर्मा बिसन गणेश कहूं, महादेव कहूं, भगवान कहूं. तेनु लक्ष्मण दशरथ राम कहूं, तेनु सीता जी जानान कहूं. तेनु गीत कहूं, ते वेद कहूं. तेनु ज्ञान कहूं, अज्ञान कहूं. तेनु आदम हवा शैस कहूं. शैस, Seth, the third son of Adam and Hawa. तेनु नूह कहूं तूफान कहूं. Do I call you Noah? Or do I call you the Tufan, the eventual this thing? Tenu Ibrahim Khalil kahun, tenu Musa bin Amran kahun, tenu Hardilda Dildar kahun, tenu Ahmad Ali Shan kahun. Now see, here's a Muslim poet who is sort of, looking at a kind of a larger social grid. And it's not just a kind of an artificial inclusion, it happens again and again. So you can't say that here is somebody who's trying to sort of, just being nice. It is not that at all. Matlab, I am very fond of giving this example from Baba Bulle Shah. Hori khelungi kah bismillah. होरी खेलूंगी कह बिस्मिल्लाह, नाम नबी की रत्न चढ़ी. नबी के नाम का मुझे जो है ना, वो मेरे अंदर जो है लाइट है. नाम नबी की रत्न चढ़ी, बूंद पड़ी अल्लाह.
Madan, you got muted. Can you please unmute yourself?
रंग रंगीली ओही खिलावे, जिस सिक्खी होवे पनापी अल्लाह. अलस्तु बी रब्बिकुम, कुरान शरीफ से आयत ले आते हैं. अलस्तु बी रब्बिकुम के सोल्स को फ्लैश देने से पहले गॉड ऑलमाइटी ये सवाल करते हैं कि भैया अब मैं तुम्हें जो है मतलब इंसान के तौर पे क्रिएट करने जा रहा हूं, पर मैं हूं कौन? अलस्तु बी रब्बिकुम, प्रीतम बोले. गॉड नहीं कहते उसको, अल्लाह नहीं कहते, खुदा नहीं कहते, रब नहीं कहते, प्रीतम बोले. ये सवाल के अंदर ही इंटाइटलमेंट है. अलस्तु बी रब्बिकुम, प्रीतम बोले, सब सखियों ने घूंघट खोले. कालू बला, बिना शक भाई तुम ही हो, तुम ही तो हो. खालू बला, यूं ही कर बोले, ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह, होली खेलूंगी क्या बिस्मिल्लाह. पर ये एक, this is not just one example, that's the point I'm making. We have a very rich tradition of Barama. In the Barama tradition, for instance, Baba Bulle Shah said something very, very fascinating, and he says, Hori Khedr Sanya Phagan, the month of Phag has arisen. Mere nain chalari vagan. So there is a kind of a, whale of tears going down my cheeks. Why? Okay, jundiyan de din tagan. Those who are leading tough lives and staying in misery, may their days of miseries be over. Sine baan prem de bajan. May their hearts be pierced with love. Hori ho rahi. This is the way Baba Bulle Shah is celebrating Hori. A very interesting point was made by Professor Devi. And in sort of, I was looking for an immediate reference that came to my mind was, and this happens all the time in Sufi poetry. We are Alif Allah. I begin from Alif and I think of Allah from A to A. Alif Allah, chambe di booty. A sapling growing up in some sort of, ordinary garden. Chamba is not in Punjabi, it is a garden. Chambe di booty murshad man vich lai, who my teacher has planted that plant in my heart. Now, Ustani बैठी हुई हैं, मृदुला जी, और मैं ये बात कहता हूं कि अल्लाह के साथ हमने अपना कॉम्पैक्ट, अपना जो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट था, कह रहे साहब आपका नाम ले लिया. We have now remembered you. Now, the next thing is this. My remembrance of you means absolutely nothing if I do not remember that Chambe di booty, a sapling, fragile, defenseless, unprotected. This is the tradition. Murshad man which lie who. The teacher's job is to actually plant this sense of belonging, of reaching out, of reaching out to the other, becoming the other, getting back and look at the process of transformation that is happening inside you. तो ये चीजें थी जो हमने उस वक्त देखनी शुरू की जब हम कॉलेज में पहुंचे. As sort of at the opening of my dad's library, and that was not the only thing that we were reading when we were in college. Already a Vietnam War ke against, there was a huge amount of kya kehte hain, activism, cultural activism, poetry, music, and whatnot. You had, Bob Dylan, you had Pete Seeger, and you had Beatles, and you had many more who were actually creating that kind of, the campuses were agog with that kind of activity. I was in Crodimal College and walked across to Delhi School of Economics, and I could sort of, be part of this. My English was not all that great, but I could sense that something was happening. And I could then reach out to sort of, Bengalis who were creating their own melodies. My Bangla was not all that great. But I was beginning to be part of this. I was beginning to be part of this. This was now expanding my identity, and the process of assimilation, cultural assimilations from across was becoming wider. It was also for the first time very clearly telling me this is the whole idea of nationhood is actually sort of, it is founded on this idea of this compassionate stitch that exists between one region and the other. And if you trouble and if you disturb that stitch, you are actually sort of, being not just inhuman, you are being destructive, you are being perverse. ये चीज जो थी और एक syncretic culture यही था. और ये एक ऐसी चीज नहीं है कि मतलब which is frozen in time. It is something which is sort of vibrating. It is something which is growing, and the possibilities of assimilation, possibilities of reaching out to the other, becoming the other, returning to your own space, and then seeing how much you've changed. All that was happening in this period. And the reason why I became a musician, in which I have no training, has to do with the identity politics which was opening up in the 70s, late 70s and 80s. It is out of this trouble, out of this, I just went back now more reflectively, now as a kind of a philosophical existential pursuit of why we have gone so wrong. Or the process of going wrong has become worse and worse and worse. Today, the only sort of thing left to us is to just stand up and to sort of recall and invoke all these glorious traditions which are now endangered. So उस वक्त जब मैं जो musician बनता हूँ, and musician बनने का process is not a lonely process. I go back to Sufism, I go back to the Bhakti tradition, I go back to Gurbani, I go back to popular music, I go back to world music, and then I begin to see that everywhere there are these beautiful resonant stitches which are actually exceeding this idea of nationhood also. And in this, I was not alone. हम शाम को एक जगह पे मिलते थे. मेरी जैसे सफदर के साथ मेरी बहुत मुलाकात रहती थी. सफदर को मिल रहे हैं, एम के रैना को मिल रहे हैं, मंजीत बाबा को मिल रहे हैं, रणबीर काले को, शमशाद को मिल रहे हैं, and इनके शर्मा को मिल रहे हैं. So you know the Sohail Hashmi. In fact, the whole mischief begins in 1969. 1969 is important because 1969 is 100 years of Ghalib's death and 500th anniversary of Guru Nanak's birth. मेरे पिता मुझे insist करके 2 ज़बानें सिखाने के चक्कर में हैं. He wants me to pick up Urdu and he wants me to pick up Sanskrit. And he has, in fact, a Shastri coming and teaching me Sanskrit. Urdu, I find difficult at that time, more difficult than Sanskrit, because I'm not able to understand the idea of vowel, signs. But I mean, I'm thankful that I have picked up Urdu. तो मैं ये कह रहा हूं कि हमारे घरों में ये चीज बड़ी कॉमन थी. मतलब जबान की जो बात की है कि 4-5 जबानें होनी चाहिए. उर्दू, पंजाबी, हिंदी, इंग्लिश, फ्रेंच, Bangla, a smattering of Bangla. I mean, these were, my father was translating Tagore in 1960s. And he's translating Aristotle, he's translating Sophocles, he's translating, I mean, all kinds of things. So in this kind of, and you're meeting people. I mean, I was into kind of existential space. But when I meet Sohail, and Sohail says, have you heard of Bertolt Brecht? Bertolt Brecht का मेरा ख्याल कल ही या परसों ही वो जन्मदिन था. तो मैंने कहा नहीं, I have not heard of Bertolt Brecht, but I have this other person, Beckett. तो 2 अलग-अलग मुख्तलिफ extreme पे पड़े हुए लोग जो हैं वो इकट्ठे होते हैं. And I begin to then read Brecht very, very seriously. And in fact, in 1975, when the emergency is declared, and M.K. Rana is doing a play which is based on, in Punjabi, based on Bertolt Brecht's Caucasian Jock Circle, Parai Cook. That is also one of the reasons why I became a musician. And later, what is happening in Punjab, and subsequently what happens, the whole thing becomes very disturbed. And I have to just try and understand and make some sense of, what is going wrong. So that is when I become a musician. Us waqt jo hai, going into the larger spaces of activism also begins. So I do not look at myself as a musician who is merely producing sweet melodies. We have to go beyond that, and we have to see how these melodies will make any sense. This is what brings me to the last part. I think I may have exceeded my limit. Is it? Can't hear you.
Well, that's fine, because it's so engaging that we would probably want it not to stop.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So, हम यहाँ से फिर चलना शुरू होते हैं. And I get into theater briefly. I work, briefly with Safdar initially. That's the first time I did theater. Safdar is making a play in 1985 along with N.K. Raina and N.K. Sharma. It is, I mean, I today, look back and I see how relevant that play would have been in the farmers, sit up on the borders. Wo play mein he's taking up this entire question of the rise of militancy in Punjab. But it is not only about Bhindranwale. It is also about Indira Gandhi. It is also about the rise of, and the menacing rise of the Hindu right. It was a dangerous play to do. My brief was to sing the songs and be the Sutradhar. I was young. I had a fairly strong voice at that time, and I could sing without a mic. And we did quite a few, performances. Must have been something like 40 to 50. But interestingly enough, our performances were disrupted only by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. So we were wondering, why Vishwa Hindu Parishad? Because the critique of Vishwa Hindu Parishad at that time was not as sort of, severe as the critique of Bhindranwale, and for following that of Indira Gandhi, through the persona of a farmer. So that remained not an enigma anymore. It is now, very clear to us why they were sort of, getting riled up. On the basis of my performance in that play, M.K. Raina asked me to be the Sutradhar of his production, which was a proscenium theatre production. And it was about all kinds of, and there were too many songs about peasants in that. And I was doing that. There were 36 songs, and I was doing 36 songs sitting on stage. Now imagine there is M.K. Raina, there is Manjeet Baba, there is Madan Gopal Singh, and initially there was Vinod Dua, and of course, Sabda was sort of, was a witness to all this, and I become a kind of a performing singer. At the end of this, my performance gets noticed, and I begin to sort of, then work with people like the filmmakers like Mani Kaul, Kumar Shani, and Syed Mirza. Things have not subsided. We are trying to understand now exactly what is it that creates the larger plural vision of which I have always been a part. I mean, I cannot think of a single production where I'm not part of this plural, there's this plural sort of, kind of, I don't want to call it a production. Of course, it was a production, but this plural installation art in this, that was the question. And, we will discuss this ever so often, whether it is Nazir's poetry, whether it is Habib Saab, whether it is Ghalib's this thing, whether it was the poets from Punjab like Pash and Dil and Amarjit Chandan, and whether it is the poetry of my own father, of Amrita Pritam, and so on and so forth. Ek baat badi clear thi, and it became absolutely sort of, transparent and perspicuous to me. And that was that in this kind of, coexistence of multiple sort of, cultural registers, it was not like a compound sentence, and I say this always, in which we make "and" as the basic joint between one sentence or the other. Coexistence always meant that a part of me survives in you and a part of you survives in me. Without that, coexistence will be a very, very kind of troubled idea. It'll be a very uneasy idea. And I always say this, that in that sense, we all felt that as, products of the kind of India that we had nurtured in our hearts, we were multiply singular. We were multiply singular and we were singularly multiple. ये बात जो है हमारी प्रैक्टिस में निकल के बड़ी साफ ये बाहर वाज़े तौर पे आ रही थी कि हमारी सिंगुलैरिटी मल्टीपल है और हमारी मल्टीप्लिसिटी सिंगुलर है. अब इस किस्म की जब उसमें से आप निकल रहे थे, तो this also led me in the direction of translations. And I started translating a whole lot of stuff. In fact, one, defining thing that we did when we were producing these posters, where, these two-liners from Sufi poetry, from Bhakti poetry, and these were the things that we were bringing together. उसमें एक लाइन थी जो हज़रत सुल्तान बाहू से ली थी, and that was, रात अंधेरी काली में लो इश्क चराग जलाता हूं. इस अंधेरी रात में, in this night of darkness, the idea of love will ignite the lamp of hope. It was also the time when we were now beginning to understand Sufi poetry in its political sort of, connotations, at least some of it. One was that there are three rungs. At one level, a rung is God, but a rung above that is the idea of ishq. But there is a third rung, which I think is the most important rung, and that is the idea of bonding, of reaching out, of caressing the other, caressing the invisible, becoming the other. That was the most important thing. And that it was not possible to speak about Sufi poetry in that sense without its sort of, deeply political intent. ऐसे नहीं है. Why should so many Sufis be hanged? I mean, why was Mansur al-Hallaj hanged? Why was Sarmad hanged? Why was Shah Inat of Jhok in the Sindh region, why was he hanged? I mean, kuch to baat rahi hogi. What was Shah Inat Jhok doing, setting up a government with the peasantry of Jhok, independently of the larger state? And why was he then captured and killed? Because he didn't know the statecraft that well. He was sort of, very generous, and so were the other Sufis and the peasantry that was ruling. So these are very, very important issues. Now, I'll give you finally, I'll give you one or two examples, and then I'll sort of, rest. There are things like in Shah Hussain, for instance. I've given you an example from Babulle Shah. I'll give you an example from Shah Hussain, 16th century. There's a copy of Shah Hussain in which he says, Naal Sarafa Cheda Tera. You can say, Naal Sarafa Chagda Tera. Tu dendi hasab rove kyun? You are in a perpetual state of conflict with the traders. Why then are you crying, rendering accounts? I mean, normally you can read this line as the worker and the worker's relationship with God. The Saraf is the God, and this Aurat is the devotee. But the Sufi, why is the Sufi using this image? He is trying to underline something very basic. And it says that your conflict with this person is not going to go away merely by your crying. You have to do something more. You have to stand up. I started discovering the larger political sort of, underpinnings of Sufi poetry and the poetry of Kabir, for instance, in a very new light because of this. And this also started sort of, deepening with the crisis unfolding all over. The crisis unfolding all over. And the crisis where it is reached today, I am ceaselessly almost. I mean, during this pandemic especially, I'm into translations. I'm translating such a huge amount of poetry from other linguistic sort of registers, and I think this is not merely to reaffirm who I am, which of course it is. It is also to sort of loudly proclaim that we are syncretic. No matter what you do, we are not going to be cowed down. That's where I'll stop. And and if there is any time, maybe I'm in post-COVID. I'm a little sort of reluctant to sing, but I mean, if you insist, then I'll probably maybe one or two lines. I'll do that.
We insist.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. ਤੈਨੂੰ ਲਛਮਨ ਦਸ਼ਰਥ ਰਾਮ ਕਹੂੰ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਸੀਤਾ ਜੀ ਜਾਨਾਨ ਕਹੂੰ ਬਲਰਾਮ ਜਸ਼ੋਦਾਨੰਦ ਕਹੂੰ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਕਿਸਨ ਕਨਹਈਆ ਕਾਨ ਕਹੂੰ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਬ੍ਰਹਮਾ ਵਿਸ਼ਨ ਗਣੇਸ਼ ਕਹੂੰ महादेव कहूँ भगवान कहूँ तेनु गीत ग्रंथ ते वेद कहूँ तेनु ज्ञान कहूँ अज्ञान कहूँ तेनु आदम हवा शेष कहूँ तेनु नूह कहूँ तूफान कहूँ तेनु इब्राहीम खलील कहूँ तेनु मूसा बिन इमरान कहूँ तेनु हर दिलदार कहूँ तेनु अहमद आली शान कहूँ. This is the little passage from Khwaja Ghulam Farid that I had sort of sung, but I'll talk about the first poem in the 16th century about this idea of India, which is like a cloth, and the threads are coming from Kashmir, from Gujarat, from Multan, from Mathura, from Bengal, from all over, and a fabric is getting created. And the cloth is called salu. Wear this salu, wear this cloth as an extension of your being. That is what the message of syncretic culture is. Salu. सालू पाया टंगणे गवांडण आए मंगणे. I took out this fabric and put it out in the sun. The lady in the neighborhood eyed this fabric and she demanded it to be given to her. She requested that it be given to her. Professor Devi had mentioned New Papua Guinea. So there is this clan of boat people, and they move in a circle from one boat to another carrying a gift, and the gift is given by one boat people to another. This is called the Kula ring, and the boat will give it to the next boat, and the next boat will give it to the next one. So this is pure exchange. And she says, I couldn't but give it to her. But it was so precious, mother. You had made it with such care. Salu Kashmir da koi aaya barfan cheer da जाना करके रानी Mother, this was such a precious salu. It had come all the way, the thread had come from the innermost core of Kashmir. It come knifing its way through the snow, and it was determined to go, and it reached me, and it became this fabric. Salu tur Gujarat da koi main pau pehli raat da ditte dang behani It's a long poem, I'll cut it short. And I'll now show you where the Muslim Sufi poet is saying something very interesting. Salu mera unida. My salu, my fabric is dreamy. Koi sham Vrindavan Sunida. It is heard of a Sham in Vrindavan. Asa jana bikhdera nima. I will go in that direction also, mother. Don't worry. And then it talks about the community. Then it talks about women actually, and then I'll come to the community. Tu sabbe salu waliya. Oh women, you're all possessors of such beautiful fabrics. Tusa ik birakh diyan daliyan. You're the branches of the same tree. Tud jeha koi na. There is no one like you. So stand up. Tusa sabbe salu waliyan. You're all possessors of different salus, diversity. But tusa ik birakh diyan daliyan. You are the branches of one tree. There is no one like you. Then it says, Salu da rang javana. The color of the salu will fade away one day. Mud pher na jag de abana. So we will not come back to this world again. There is all the more reason. What? Kummed hum humanima. Let's go out, in a carnival of collectivity. There is no other way. This is one life, and it's one life. You have to, do this. So, this is the syncretic tradition that I'm talking about, which is very diverse. Even in one language, as I said, there are many dialects. But the impulse to reach out, to be the other, to meet the other, to caress the other, to become the other, to return to your place as a changed and ennobled man, to rescind this politics of hateful identity that does not admit of other people. It has to be sort of, we have to stand up and say, no, sir, please go away. Otherwise, we'll sing this song. We are mad. We will go out singing this song. We are not scared. So I'll stop it here now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madan. It's actually sacrilege to be speaking after such beauty. It can only take away, it cannot add. And yet I have my job of continuing with the program. And therefore I must speak, not to strike a discordant note, but hopefully to carry your beautiful notes forward. I just, before I invite questions and comments, though I know we are already going beyond the time, but I'm sure people have stayed on in large numbers, and I'm sure people would want to comment and ask. But there was just one little thing I wanted to add, which came out of both the lectures, and especially the recent direction in which Madan's, I can't call it talk, but whatever it was, presentation went. I was just reading fortuitously just yesterday the autobiography, Memoirs of Amartya Sen. And I came across, it's a long time, it's almost a chapter, but one little passage from there I wanted to read out to you, just to strengthen the whole focus which we have seen today, that the real history of this country, of our people, goes in a certain direction. You can see it, you read Discovery of India by Nehru, it's there in every page. That's the whole spirit of the book. All scholars, all that I know of Indian history as a historian, all points in this direction. And that's why we are so violated when people are trying to push us into a direction which violates our history, which takes us away from our past, which takes us away from the culture which our ancestors going back thousands of years have bequeathed to us. And here I just wanted to bring in a little passage from Amartya Sen's memoir, where he talks about his grandfather, the great Siti Mohan Sen, who wrote finally towards the end of his life this book in English on Hinduism for Penguin, which became famous. But actually he starts, Siti Mohan Sen was a Sanskrit scholar based in Banaras. He was an MA in English literature, but he was also a great Sanskrit scholar. But at a very young age of 17, he got this desire. He became deeply interested in Kabir. And then as a 17-year-old young man, this Bengali boy from a very, very ordinary family, traveled all over North India, all where Kabir's dohas were still sung and recited and people knew them, and collected this poetry. And that became the basis of his scholarship of, which we only know that he was a great scholar of Hinduism, but he was a scholar of classical Sanskrit, of Kabir's poetry. Then from Kabir, he goes to Dadu, he goes to the Bauls, all in him. And how deeply he influences Tagore. Of course, Tagore influences him. And Amartya Sen tells us about how when, what Tagore actually begged him to come to Shantiniketan. He had become a head teacher in a school in Chamba, if you please, diversity, Chamba, the hill state. This Bengali young man had found a job as a teacher in the hill state of Chamba. But Tagore hears of him and goes after him and persuades him to come to Shantiniketan, where he then stays for the rest of his life and becomes Tagore's closest friend and comrade. But why does Tagore call him? Because he has in him this syncretism. He's a scholar of Sanskrit. He's educated in the modern education. He's a scholar of and a practitioner. He's a Kabir Panthi. He calls himself a Kabir Panthi. And then vowels and whatnot. And all this richness is brought to Shantiniketan, to the students there, to Tagore himself. Tagore relies on him. And in fact, Tagore translates a selection of his poems of Kabir, which of course he had published in many volumes, Kriti Mohan Sen. Out of that, Tagore selects, and with the help of major poets, English poets, like Ezra Pound, for example, Evelyn Underhill, he produces English translations of Kabir. I'm just telling you this little story, to tell you what is our tradition. What is the best that this people in this country, people like Tagore, people like Kriti Mohan Sen, people like Amartya Sen, this is what they talk about. This is what they are trying to bequeath to us. And in front of this, where does this, I can't even call it, give it a name, it is not politics. It is not culture. It is just falsehood and absurdity. And it is a shame in all of us that it is there at all, that it's got a resonance at all. And all I can say is that from my side, that through these two great scholars and practitioners that we've had with us today, I hope we can transmit a little bit more of this to our people, to our youth, to all of us, to keep our spirit going and to carry on with the great fight, which we shall, of course, win. There is no doubt about that also, because our past is with us, our history is with us, our culture is with us, not with them. They are the aberration, we are the force. So with those words, I invite all of you to make comments, ask any questions, offer anything that you would like to contribute by way of your own perspective to this discussion. I see many people here who stayed long, and I'm sure would have something to say. So the floor is now open. Shabnam?
Yeah, I think we can invite people. They are raising hands. The best thing would be to raise your hands. Priyanka has raised her hand.
Okay, then we start then straight away. Priyanka?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
We can, but we can't see you. If you want to be seen,
okay,
then
yes.
put your video on.
Sorry, I was. जी, तो दरअसल मेरा सवाल प्रोफेसर गणेश देवी से है. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to speak in Hindi or English because professor was speaking in Hindi, so I'm not sure.
You can speak in any language that you like.
तो जी, so दरअसल because you were providing a historical context, thank you very much for the talk. It was very enlightening. So I had two questions actually, because when you mentioning that we've not had wars like on basis of language, yet I mean there's been some violence, if I could so say, if we talk about the reorganization of states or the creation of states, the post colonial India. And that's something I'd like to understand, because like you were stressing on diversity, which has been so intrinsic, and yet where is it that probably language chauvinism came into place and this othering began. And I specifically would like to understand in present day context. For example, when you look at Hindi, right? Hindi being an official language, and yet I know so many people, like my own friends, Hindi Divas, when it comes, it's somehow celebrated with so much fanfare that everybody starts congratulating and wishing that, oh, it's the national language, where it is an official language of the union, with different states having their own official languages. So where is that conflation of the language began with the idea of the nation and also religion? Because again, for example, the Constituent Assembly debates, they reveal the conversation around Hindi and Urdu and national language and official language and all of that. And today, the way we see every day an attack on Urdu language happening in a lot of ways, and it being conflated with religion, because it is not. From my own limited understanding, I understand that the origin and development of Urdu, whether we call it Urdu or Rekhta or Hindustani, it was very much, in the colonial, the North India and Pakistan. It's actually part of that Sajhi Virasat which we're referring to. So where is that conflation of the language with the idea of the nation, or the conflation of the language with a religion begins? Because then that becomes a tool of othering. And it's just today, the attack which is happening, it is and I see it happening with even people who I would not otherwise, and it's disturbing because people who I would not imagine referring to it in that sense would actually start talking about the language belonging to a religion. Particularly, I'm referring to right now when it's happening with Urdu, but also this is, of course, in a larger context. And if you could maybe
Thank you.
let
I think
know
Priyanka, Professor Devi,
and
both
share
are
readings.
by now.
Yes, any readings also, if you could share maybe.
Okay.
Thank you for your comment. Let me see if I can address all of the questions you raised, but I'll address some of those. In the history of Indian languages, the languages that we today call modern Indian languages started emerging in what today we call early medieval time. For instance, the 10th century, 11th century, 12th century. Some of the modern Indian languages had emerged even prior to that. One of them, Tamil, was there for a very long time. But what was the reason for the rise of languages like Marathi or Gujarati or Telugu or Malayalam? One most important reason was that prior to that date, prior to that era, language was made a kind of a trap, a kind of a prison for restricting man's relation with God. If you are to, if all these sacred things, then not all could accept privilege, and non-Brahmins, in a very large measure, were denied that privilege. So people started saying this was a rebellion. It was the rise of modern Indian languages was a political event, a cultural political event, and probably the greatest event in the entire history of India, because it spreads for a very long time, beginning with the 8th century rise of sects. Sects came up to challenge a single or overpowering idea of truth about life. And then came the languages to the aid of the sects. For instance, a Marathi poet in the early phase of Marathi, his name was Eknath. He said in Marathi, if Sanskrit is created by God, is Marathi created by thieves? This was challenging the supremacy, the hegemony, if you like that term, of Sanskrit and people who controlled the Sanskrit language and its transaction, intergenerational transaction. It is the same story in Kannada, in Gujarati. Hemachandracharya, the first among the Gujarati poets, wrote a book called Desi Namamala. He knew Sanskrit, but he understood that the people were cut off. Now this sensibility in the languages, whether it's Kannada, Gujarati, Bangla, Jaydev's Geet Govind, coming from Oriya or Bangla, but they were bringing in a political challenge, a challenge to the authority of knowledge, of language, of culture, and therefore control of the political class and the mindset of the political class, and so ultimately the political power. At the same time, India was also encountering a new language culture. Persian had come in. Persian had brought many shades of love with it. Persian had also brought new shades of bhakti with it. So that entire bhakti period defined the emergence of the languages, their personality and their sensibility. When we started in the 20th century, when we started moving towards the idea of a nation, people obviously wanted space for the language sensibility, because sub-nations in India are what form the Indian nation. I mean, if you look at the constitution, you will see, thanks to the wisdom of those who made the constitution, that India is nowhere described as a nation. It is described as a union of states. India, Bharat, that is Bharat, is a union of states. On the very first section of the constitution, we are told that we have come together bringing these many sensibilities. After independence, the question of reorganization of the states had started erupting, because the British administration had organized the states along the lines of how they got incrementally the control of feudal India, of the states. And so they had devised the Central Territory, Madras, Bombay Presidency, Bengal, and so on. The NEFA, Northeast, later called NEFA, Northeast Frontier Agency. So people started saying, look, we are not Bombay Presidency. We are Marathi-speaking people, we are Gujarati-speaking people. So in 1952, in Telangana, in Punjab, a few years later in Maharashtra, in the Dravidic area, Tamil, people's language movement started emerging as an expression of their nationalism, their understanding of nationalism, subnationalism. And they had not rebelled against the idea of India as a union of states. They said they are supporting the idea of union of the states. As a result, in mid-50s, the government of India appointed a Linguistic State Reorganization Commission. And from 1956, H.G. Barve was sent to USSR to study how that they had worked it out, the multilingual nation. Beginning with 1956 to 1965, that those 10 years, linguistic states were created in India. Now, these movements were, they became only occasionally violent. There were some deaths. Some people became martyrs for the language cause. But none of these movements had anything to do with challenging the idea of India as a union. It was all the entire movement, all those movements were there to support the idea of union of states. And people wanted to say how they want their states. So that is where we link the aspirations of people that had started rising from the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, where a nascent idea of a modern India was at work, because the economy had changed, modes of transportation changed in those centuries from the along the 15th, 16th, 17th century. the mode of writing changed because paper became available in India in the 13th century and so on. So all of that incrementally and in an aggregate form spurted up, flared up, I'll say, got articulated after our struggle for independence had come to a definitive point, that is, India had become independent. And so people wanted to spell out freedom, flesh it out. And since the 8th schedule was with them, they said, let every language that got into the 8th schedule get a state. I must add, and there I'll stop. The 8th schedule was not just about languages in print and languages spoken by a large number of people. The 8th schedule was done very thoughtfully. Today it has got 22 languages, but at that time the 14 languages included had space for Urdu and Sanskrit. Now, Sanskrit at no time was spoken by any large numbers in India after the 8th century. And yet Sanskrit was accepted because those who made the constitution did not want to go to any exclusionary extreme. They wanted to include, accommodate, and therefore Sanskrit, though not spoken by people, was given space there. Urdu was given space there despite the 8th schedule coming into force soon after the partition. The language is not associated with any religion. Urdu emerged in the south, Gulbarga and Aurangabad, and also at Lucknow. It has nothing to do with religion at all. There is no Islamic scripture ever written in Urdu. All of that. But ignorance is a human folly which pervades societies when societies choose to enter dark times. And it is through such conversations that we can find a way out of dark times. And as Prof Mridula Mukherjee said, we shall eventually arrive there where, as the Upanishad says, Tamasoma Jyotirgame, there shall be light. There shall be light. India has seen many despotic rules. This is not the first, this may not be the last, but India, through its syncretism, through its ability to nurture dialogue, through its multilingualism, through its tolerance, has seen the exit of all such despotic rules. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mridula, we can take the next two questions together.
Okay.
Laila and then Tanveer.
Okay, fine.
Laila, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Shabnam. And thank you, Mridula ji. I mean, what can I say? I have been truly awakened this warm, sunny day in Bangalore. And I really have, I have so much of hope now, especially after hearing Madan ji and his music and his voice. My question is, how hopeful is he today of, the way we're moving forward? Because we all know we're living in an environment of pure hate. And the kind of, things he talked about and sang about is almost like a utopian dream for me. Secondly, I want to know, is there any possibility at all to create a platform of different generation of musicians to come together? And I know he doesn't like the word production, or at least an event where we can really put out music as an advocacy tool. Because like he said, no longer can it be a simple melody of simple love stories, but today it has to be a melody of power, a power to create powerful messages on, love in its interpretation of justice. So I'd just like Madan ji to respond to this. Thank you again.
Thank you. Madan will take the second question also. Tanveer, can you please ask your question?
Yeah, Professor Mukherjee, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Oh, so thank you. I have masks on. That's why I was worried about that. So I have two very short questions. One to Professor Devi and one to Madan ji. Professor Devi, you spoke quite eloquently about the history of language. I just wanted very briefly to ask you about the language as a socio-cultural or as a cultural identity, which is in connection with Priyanka's question, Ms. Priyanka's question, against the backdrop of the Bangladesh-Pakistan split. And the question of whether there is anything called as mother tongue. Second question to Madanji, very quickly you spoke very eloquently again about the post-independent India and how the syncretism was kind of articulated the voices. I wanted to ask you briefly the idea of syncretism. There is a danger of, when one talks about the assimilation of voices and openness, of flattening the idea of various problematic ideas. And one of the questions that I have is about the idea of subaltern, how it gets articulated, particularly in the case of Bollywood. And I'm here because you spoke about the songs. If you could, briefly talk about Shailendra's, for example, contribution to the Bollywood. And what does it do to the subaltern voice? How does it not get flattened in the sea of other voices? Thank you.
Madan, you are mute. Madan ji, आप mute है.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So Shailendra, there are 2 points, quick points that I would like to make in response to Tanveer's questions. The first is that, what we witnessed in the beginning as actually an inclusive celebration of diversity has, towards the end, it has become a bit standardized. So, that a standardized sort of, idea of diversity and a genuinely sort of, multiply celebrating the idea of diversity as it was in the beginning. So there is a kind of a slight shift, but I'm not, excessively scared of that. And I'm not really afraid. Coming to Shailendra, as you know, the Shailendra is from he's part of the Purab belt, eastern UP and Bihar. And you know that he was born in Rawalpindi, and he spent his childhood there. And he was part of the Ravidasiya sect. So he's already, on the margins. And initially, sort of, he was writing the kind of poetry. I'm not familiar with the poetry that is his, non-film poetry. The poetry that I know of Shailendra's is the poetry in which he was also sort of, addressing the question of the complete erasure of the Sufi, registers. I'll just give you one example where, for instance, ये रात भीगी भीगी ये मस्त नजारे उठा धीरे धीरे चांद प्यारा प्यारा. Now in this, what is happening is that उठा धीरे धीरे वो चांद प्यारा प्यारा actually is a kind of a dialogue with the Hazrat Sultan Bahu, where he's speaking about Chad Channa Kar Rushnai. Arise, O moon, spread your moonlight. Chad Channa Kar Rushnai, Zikr Karinde Tare Hu. The stars have been in remembrance for long. Galiyan de vich phiran asurda, lalan de ban jare hu. There is a possibility that through your song, you will be able to actually sort of, throw light in those dark spaces where people and talents as precious as rubies is lying unrecognized and hidden. Now, that is the actual sort of, reference. And I think in Jalandhar poetry, it is repeatedly sort of, visible. To what extent the subaltern is sort of, brought into its, field of reference, I will not be, very clear. But the fact that he himself comes from such a, background, and the fact that, if you read his film songs a little closely, then you will see that his concerns are very different as compared to, let's say, Sahir and Majroor. So that there is a clear resonance to that. Now, coming to the other question, which and the other lady, I'm forgetting her name, Laila. Yeah. So I have only one thing to say in response. बोल ज़बां अब तक तेरी है, बोल की लब आजाद है तेरे, बोल ज़बां अब तक तेरी है, तेरा सुतवा जिस्म है तेरा, बोल की जान अब तक तेरी है, बोल की लब आजाद है तेरे. And I'm going to do the difficult part because I'm just recovering from COVID. So let's see if I'm able to raise my voice. बोल की आहन घर की दुकान में, धुंध है शोले सुर्ख है आहन, खुलने लगे कुफलों के दगाने, फैला हर एक जंजीर का दामन, बोल की थोड़ा वक्त बहुत है, बोल की थोड़ा वक्त बहुत है, जिस्म ज़बां की मौत से पहले, बोल की सच जिंदा है अब तक, बोल की सच जिंदा है अब तक, बोल जो कुछ कहना है कह ले, बोल की लब आजाद है तेरे. I love my utopia. This gives me the strength. Tomorrow is his birthday, actually, Faiz Ahmad Faiz Saab's. And I think for me, this is really the right note to stop and say that I love my utopia, whatever it is, however fragile it may be. I have to sort of, speak up against these artificially manufactured dystopias. I will not cow down. At least I'm clear about that. And of course, the idea of community formation is central to this kind of singing. In fact, if I say, Bol ki lab azad mere, I want you to join in. Bol ki lab azad hai mere. Bol ki lab azad hai mere. Yes, that's what it is. Thank you.
Dr. Devi, there was a question for you.
Tanvirji, this Bangladesh, becoming Bangladesh, made a very, very deep, lasting impact on my life. And it was as follows. The census of India had mentioned 1652 mother tongues in the 61 census. The 71 census, statistics of which, language data of which was published only in 77, had mentioned only 109. Of the 109, 108 were names of mother tongues. The 109th item read all others. I saw this data sometime in 1980, published by R.C. Nigam. And since then, I have been in search of all those 1500 odd languages that were concealed. I spent decades chasing them, locating them, describing them. Why did the census take that decision to conceal the names? They introduce a cutoff point. If a language is spoken by less than 10,000, the name of that language or mother tongue would not be included in the list published by the census office, even if the census authorities have information about speakers of those languages. The cutoff point was introduced because Indian government at that time felt that there could be linguistic separatism in the country. I have often tried to get to the bottom of that sentiment. What was it after having made India a union of states speaking different languages? Why did the government lose nerve on the question of language identity as a permissible diversity element in the being of India? And in answer to that question, in answer to that quest, I tried to see if we have borders which can probably create danger from that perspective. I came to the conclusion that even if Tamil is shared with Lanka and Tamil Nadu, and Sindhi and Punjabi with Pakistan, and Bangla with Bangladesh, there are many more languages that are spoken across borders. For instance, the Karen of Myanmar is spoken not just in Tripura and Mizoram, but also in Andamans. There are languages, minor languages, nearly 162 languages are there that are shared by India with India's neighbors. And I thought that the government, the authorities need to be sensitized on the immense possibility of bringing countries together because of shared languages, rather than thinking of this language as a challenge to national integrity. I think India is torn between these two strands, two ends. That is, India as a unitary nation, India as a federal nation, India as a single-centered nation, and India as a diversity nation. And in my opinion, the overwhelming feeling of Indian people is in favor of diversity, not in favor of a superimposed unity. Indians can be united if they are diverse. Let me finish this by going once again back to history. The Mahabharata, we are talking of Bharat, but let's talk of the Mahabharata for half a minute. In his first recital, in Adi Parva, Mahabharata was reported as being sung by three different persons. Ashtadasha Sahasrani, Ashtadasha Shatani cha, Aham Vetti, Shoko Vetti, Sanjaya Vetti Vanavana. Sanjay knew part of it, Shuka knew part, and the singer, who was a tribal, a Paishachic language speaker. All these three are different languages, different caste identities, different ethnic origins. Three together made the Mahabharata, the first version of the Mahabharata, Jaya Ityasa. I think that is the essence of what India is, the idea of India. An India which has a sense of having many beginnings. India which has a sense of having many spaces, socially and politically, in terms of nations, sub-nations, and so on. Our nationalism is still being spelled out. At the moment, it is passing through an aberration, but there's a lot more we need to put in, and my generation failed in doing so. because my generation, a person like me, dedicated to seminars and conferences and lectures and self-glorification, failed in paying attention to that. I hope the younger generation will pay attention, and I'm very optimistic about it. To the Bangalore lady, I want to say that when singing was banned in Bangalore pubs 2 years back, graffiti appeared on the walls of Bangalore in areas which had never seen graffiti. And so there is in Bangalore a desire to resist. And I want to congratulate all Bangaloreans for that. And there is a desire to resist in the minds of Indian people also. I have no doubts on that. I worked with Adivasis and nomadic communities, and I know they will protect this country, even when a middle class, an educated class might, try to save its own skin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, I thought questions had ended, but I see one hand now. It's a bit late, but a very quick question. Malcolm Joseph. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, one comment and one question. The first one is about Dr. Devi's wife. You have mentioned her in your books about the amount of work that she has done with the marginal groups and their languages, and how it has impacted your moves in your academic and linguistic work. And the question is about, you spoke about the possibilities that are generated by the tremendous diversity of languages with our surrounding nations, whether it's Sri Lanka or Burma, Myanmar. But what about the whole problem of the Akhanda Bharat, which is a perverse kind of suggestion and project of the Sangha Parivar? That poses a real challenge to what you are saying.
Well, the origin of the Akhanda Bharat in 1920s was deeply impacted by a linguistic theory about Aryas with pure bloods, and it was all fiction, but it was impacted by that. And today, of course, we get an impression that ideology is somehow we equate electoral success with acceptance of ideology. There is spread of ideology. There is the WhatsApp factory, busy overnight. I mean, day and night. That is true. But have the farmers accepted that? Have the students accepted that? Have women accepted that? There's reason to doubt if that has actually happened. The ideology is dangerous. It is playing out now. But given the nature of Indian civilization, which respects diversity, which tolerates diversity, I'm not saying India was without violence. That is not humanly possible. The human species is inclined towards violence by the nature of the human body, the mind, and the social organization. But by and large, humans have, Indians have been tolerant of diversity. And indeed, I think diversity is our best readily available insurance against a totalitarian regime. I mean, even today, though we do not notice it, it does not become immediately obvious. But who are the peoples against the regime? The Dravidic speaking, the Pali speaking, and those who come from the Prakrut land. And the Pali, Prakrut, Dravidic, the people of Buddha, the people of Mahavir, who gave the idea of aparigraha to Gandhi, and the people who worship, who respect Ambedkar and Periyar, they will save this country from such ideology. I know our patience is running out every day. Mobs are ruling the social spaces. Every day we are being pushed closer to a civil war and so on. I think India is much larger than a single individual, single idea or ideology, a single party. And India shall win. India shall win. I salute that India. And I belong to that India. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I think it only remains for me to thank all the participants who've been here with us now for almost 3 hours. It's getting close to 7. We started at 4 and it's been a wonderful journey. It feels like that. It feels that we started long ago, but we've come to a very beautiful place. And at least for some time, we would like to live in that place, think about it, let it inspire us, let it recharge us, so that we can make sure that it remains what we are, the beautiful place that we are in today. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, Madanji. Thank you, Professor Devi. Thank you, Shabnam, for putting it all together as always. I think everybody, from the comments I see, people have had very, I think, enlightening. And I like the way many people are saying it's been very calming. You know, after all the negativity that we see around us and hear around us, this has been, as I said, a journey into love and peace and all the beautiful things of life. And we need that to keep recharging our batteries. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mridula, Professor Mridula Mukherjee, Madan Gopal ji, and Dr. Devi. Thank you for being there, participating, and as somebody said in the chat box that both the lectures were mesmerizing. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next month on 12th March for this series. In between, we'll be doing a lot more, which will keep reaching you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shabnam.
You can unmute yourself if anybody wants to say hi or something. We need to.
Yes, both the lectures were great. Simply great. You could keep on listening these two wonderful speakers.
Gauhar, we are waiting to hear you now. आप पर्दे के पीछे और कितने दिन रहेंगे?
अरे मेरा इलाका तो नज़्में ही है, whatever.
तो एक नज़्मों की शाम हो जाए इसी सब्जेक्ट पे.
हाँ,
That's a good idea. That can happen before the 12th March, I think.
शबनम जल्दी में रहती हैं. 12 मार्च बहुत दूर लग रहा है.
12 मार्च को तो लेक्चर्स होंगे.
और क्या? ठीक है.
Poetry and music can come in between.
I agree, Shabnam. I think lots of music, lots of poetry. That is truly, truly something I hope that we can all do.
We have been listening to both of you singing.
Yeah, that was just wonderful.
But I'm saying we need 1,000 more such amateurs who will send out these messages. That is what's going to lead to amplification. Sachi. Anyway, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Shabnam. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for being there, Ramu. Both of you are our inspiration.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's so great to have you there.
Well, it's great to be here.
And your constant letters to the President of India.
Yeah.
There's probably a cupboard full of them, which might suddenly fall out like skeletons rattling. Anyway, but thank you once again. And Mridula ji, I just wanted to say, you are such a beautiful moderator, and you bring alive, and also the links with history. And that whole idea of the stitches is something which has just, I don't know, fired my imagination, that's for sure.
I know Madan was beautiful on that.
Yep.
Absolutely. It's really lovely. That whole imagery of the stitches is beautiful.
Yeah, it always saves 9.
Yes. Right. So we wish we'd done them earlier, right?
Truly.